It's very cliche to say that it's a dream come true because that's how all of us who are doing these things feel. But it's true because, growing up, you didn't even think it was possible to direct a Star Wars movie. You didn't even think it was something that was possible to do.
They were done. They were finished.
Yeah, and also, it's just, it's crazy to think that you were able to, that this is what we do for our jobs.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 87. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hey, John, how's it going?
Hello.
This has been a week. You're good.
Yeah, it's been a couple weeks.
You're good. Let's move on. Let's move it on. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
No,
I'm fine, Robert. What else do you need to know?
For listeners, I completely screwed up the recording time today, so I'm like, I thought I had an hour or something, and now I'm like, I'm actually 45 minutes late.
That's all right. We took a couple weeks off. I had some. I was out of town. I was in Portland, Maine, for 5 days or so. It was really nice. It was hot though. When we were packing, even the night before we left, when we were packing, it's like, it'll be in the 80s for a day or two, but then it'll be 60s and kind of rainy. So we packed accordingly. And so we got there and we had like 3 straight days of low to mid 90 degree weather.
Oh,
so, and we didn't rent a car because we're like, well, we're not really going to go crazy. The downtown looks pretty walkable and all that kind of stuff. So, we were walking around pretty much the entire time and just got really hot, hotter than I expected to be in Portland, Maine.
Yeah. I just think of John Carpenter's The Fog or something.
Mm-hmm.
When I think of any part of Maine, but obviously,
yeah.
Much like I was in Omaha, Nebraska last month, and I had thought, probably just going to be dreary and stuff, and it gets pretty warm there too. We had just missed a 90-degree heat wave or something, and I think it's 90 degrees there now. So we're learning, and that's
right before we had showed up, like the 3 or 4 days before we showed up, it had been like in the 60s and raining and muddy and all that. So we basically just missed the bad weather, which on the one hand is nice because we're on vacation. On the other hand, it's like, yeah, we got sunburned in Portland, Maine, which we were not expecting. But it's southern Maine, so you're not like all the way up there. But Casco Bay is right there, which is really nice. And so we took the ferry to a couple of the islands there, which are mostly residential, that you can kind of walk around a little bit. But it's like the deepest body. It's like the furthest north that you get a deep enough body of water in for boats to go through that doesn't freeze in the winter or something like that. Does that make sense? Or it's like it's deep enough for boats to go through, and it's the furthest north you can get without the water freezing. So it was called Portland. It was a big port city, as you would expect. The water up there is really great. It's like super clear and super blue, and there's this one. It's like the last remaining old historic signal tower in the U.S. And it was close enough to our hotel So we walked there one day and we went up to the top, and I mean, you can basically just see out into the Atlantic Ocean. And it's great. So heat aside, the weather was really nice when we were there. And so it was a nice, relaxing vacation. And then came back to packing up the apartment because we are, I'm moving. I am moving to a different state 5 days from now. Is that correct? 1, 2, 3.
I don't keep your schedule. I don't know.
5 days from now. Robert, when am I moving?
I could barely keep my own schedule, obviously. Yeah. And now I have to know when you guys move. I better call you all.
So, so I'm moving in 5 days. So, we came back to this nice, relaxing vacation, and then just,
you're in the thick of it.
Yeah. So it's a little less relaxing, but, so we're packing things up, but at the same time, we're trying to, spend time in the city. It's, we're leaving the city. We want to do fun stuff. So we're trying to find time for that. So then we'll probably say this at the end too. We're going to take next week off as well, because next week I will be on the road from here to there. But we'll be back in a couple weeks. So anyway, we took 2 weeks off.
Yeah, it doesn't really. There hasn't been any news lately.
Yeah, there was. I mean, the last 2 weeks there were a few little things. They released more issues of the Screaming Citadel, crossover comic. Donald Glover did an interview that he mostly just talked about, like, I really respect, Billy D. Williams' choices, but I'm also trying to do my own thing. And Colin Trevorrow did an interview, which we may talk about, and his movie, The Book of Henry, just came out, which is apparently just abysmal. So we may talk about that, but they're just like a few little things like, I guess we could talk about this. And then yesterday happened.
Yeah, wow.
And what happened yesterday, for those of you who have not heard this already, or just to, I guess, set up our conversation, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, or Phil Miller and Chris Lord, I can never remember which is which. I think it's Phil Lord and Chris Miller.
Well,
I always do, every time we have to talk about them, I have to say their names both ways,
I
can't remember which one's correct.
I had to rewrite a tweet last night because I kept thinking about this song by Tom Waits from Nighthawks at the Diner, where it's like, what is it? It's like warm beer and cold women, and I just keep going, Chris Lord and Phil Miller. It's like that kind of. There's something about it, but we are so burying the lead this week.
Yeah. And the confusion also comes that the title character of their show, The Last Man on Earth, is named Phil Miller.
Exactly.
So that's where I get confused. So Chris Miller and Phil Lord, the directors of the Han Solo movie, are now no longer the directors of the Han Solo movie. So they are 4 to 5 months into filming. They have about 3 weeks left to go. And then we get various press releases saying that they have left the movie over creative tension, creative differences.
Sorry.
There's some creative differences going on at Robert's place at the moment. But I think I'm sure I mentioned this in a different context on a previous episode, but Harry Shearer was actually on Saturday Night Live twice. And the first time he was on was like right at the very beginning, season 2 or 3 or something. And then he was fired from the show, or he left the show, and he cited creative differences, and someone asked him about it. And the show, Lauren Michaels says, he left over creative differences. And they asked Harry Shearer about it, and he said, yeah, I was creative and they were different. So anytime I hear creative differences, that line pops in my head. But everything has been respectful. We haven't.
I don't know about that.
Okay. We haven't heard a ton of like juicy leaked details about how, this person didn't get along with that person or whatever. Although maybe there's been an update that Robert can give us, but. Basically citing creative differences. And so they are no longer directing this movie, and so this movie's kind of in limbo, with just 3 weeks left to film. But then also all of the post-production work, supervising the stuff that ILM is doing, all of that business. So, Robert, what's the latest on this?
Well, I mean, I think the Hollywood Reporter, was the first media outlet to break this, and I think a lot of it was that creative differences kind of thing. And I think Variety or an update by Hollywood Reporter came back later in the day and basically spelled it out that they were fired from the movie.
Yeah.
It was not a thing where it was like, oh, well, I guess we have to agree to disagree. They were like, Kathleen Kennedy fired them from the film. And yes, it was probably because creative differences. The unnamed sources, of course, always pop up in these stories, at least in the second one. And I would tell people just to dig around a little bit. My footnotes aren't necessarily perfect. So please do independent checking before you spread rumors. But basically what they were saying, it really came down to the fact that the tone of the film and the takes that they were getting and the way that the entire way that they ran the production apparently was problematic to Kathleen Kennedy. Now, some of it actually this unnamed source got down to the nitty gritty and even made a comment to the effect of obviously I don't even know what this means. That they didn't even like the way they folded their socks. But that's a quote. And it was like, well, I mean, either that's somebody on the team that's still bristling from having been let go from a job. I mean, no matter how you stack it up, this is, I mean, as far as in this realm of Star Wars, this is pretty shocking. I mean, it's so rare to have a film lose their directors, not even in mid-production. Well, I mean, technically it's mid-production, but near the end of principal photography. I mean, there's always been stories about, and I was trying to compile some last night and I kind of dropped off without having done very many, but there's mainly because what happens is when these movies have a major change in director or production, they kind of just end up thrown on the scrap heap. They get released in January,
right? And
to much,
before they even get to this point,
right? They end up on video, and then it becomes a. Most likely, it's probably an insurance bond. It's that kind of thing where they have to weigh. It's like, well, we're insured for $200 million, but we could potentially make this much with it. And I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I am kind of taken aback. I mean, without getting too far into the directors themselves and my feelings about them, just the mere information, I had basically assumed that I have my reservations because of the things they had done before and their tone and whatnot. And then for it to be like, well, we hired him, and then you have to kind of make peace with that, even though I think we've been kind of, and generally when I talk to people, even before this revelation, is that, there was a lot of anxiety about this film. That, none of the casting has caused anybody to kind of go like, oh, well, that's such a great casting, I'm super excited. It's always been like, oh, he's good, but who knows what we're getting here. And I think that maybe these reservations are not without merit from fans, from people who have spent a lot of time thinking about this,
right?
I think that again, we'll get into this later, is I think that has a lot to do with maybe probably the seeds of this kind of problem about kind of not warring factions, but two different ideas about where Star Wars as a franchise is going to go in the future,
right?
And I mean, to shortcut it, in my opinion, I bet you anything this really breaks down to something. One side wanting to kind of do the Rogue One thing, where it's infinitely nostalgic to the source material. And then you've got these guys, these young creative directors, wanting to, bolstered by this lip service that Kathleen Kennedy had been basically spouting about Rian Johnson's creation of The Last Jedi, and even going into Colin Trevorrow, That, well, we just, what we do is we have our meetings and then we sit down and then we shake hands and then we walk away.
Right.
Which is, I think, is what she, and you could argue, well, she said that about the numbered movies and not necessarily the spin-offs. But for all intents and purposes, she really gave this idea that, like, the spin-offs were the Take a Chance movies. But then she kind of acted like it was the numbered movies that were the Take a Chance movies. So it's been this like kind of confusing dialogue that has been going on for the last couple of months, because it's like, I don't know. I'm trying not to. Well, no, I'm not trying. But my point, I can't help but take this holistic view about where Lucasfilm is right now, kind of coming off of just. Even going back to the reshoots to Rogue One and how much that they've spent time trying to diffuse any conception that it might have been a problem, like it had been a completely crappy movie that they had to fix. And it was like, oh no, it's just cockpits and stuff like that, to Mark Hamill's comments about, him having to walk back, comments he said about Rian Johnson not understanding the character. Then the soft reaction to The Last Jedi teaser, to Rian Johnson getting defensive on Twitter, and him almost becoming like this figurehead of, like, he's almost like the anti J.J. Abrams, in the sense that he's going out there kind of almost argumentatively engaging with fans about, like, don't worry, it's what you like. Whereas J.J. Abrams kind of had a light, kind of like almost for lack of a better term, a Spielbergian kind of like air of, I'm above it all, yet I understand the pressure I have on me. But, J.J. Abrams wore that pressure generally as the same way Lucas or Spielberg, of people of that ilk. You know what I mean? He elevated himself to that level. Even if I don't think he's on that level artistically, he kind of didn't do that. He didn't have that imposter syndrome that a lot of young directors have. And of course, JJ's not a young director. And to be honest, these guys aren't even really young directors. But, that's that kind of thing where it's like, let's say, God forbid, Kevin Smith had directed a Star Wars movie, and I'm knocking on wood that I'm not creating some kind of force in the universe to make that happen. But my point is if Kevin Smith had been, he'd have joked about, oh yeah, I'm gonna ruin this, and it would have been funny and it would have been light and stuff like that. But my point is that it seems like we have this weird thread through going now, and all of a sudden there's some fire with this smoke that maybe this idea of one movie every year and a half, every 9 months even, is leading to some real problems within Lucasfilm.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So this Han Solo movie, we've been told all along, like, this is the one that's going to be different, right? That we had these quotes when we were filming, like, oh, these guys are breaking all the rules and they're doing crazy things and they're off there making their I don't know what, and this is the movie that's going to break the mold or whatever. Yes. And now it turns out that there maybe wasn't total agreement over how best to do that. So, when you hear creative differences and I think Lord and Miller's statement specifically said, like, creative, disagreements with our creative partners, right. Which could mean either something as big and generic, I guess, as Lucasfilm, right? Like just Lucasfilm in general, or it could be as specific as, the people writing the movie, right? And given that, Lawrence Kasdan has so much experience writing Star Wars, and I mean, I've been the one saying, like, before we had episode. I guess even after episode 7, but before we had Rogue One, I was the one saying, like, we really don't have a lot of evidence that anyone other than Lawrence Kasdan knows how to write a Star Wars movie, right? So he has experience writing Star Wars movies. He has a particular affinity for Han Solo, the character, which, certainly came out in episode 7, and that's why he wanted to write this movie. He wanted to make this movie. So he probably has very specific, or at least, he has certain ideas about what he thinks Han Solo would do in different situations based on who that character is and kind of what's the core of that character. And that, I'm guessing, probably ran up against some things that Lord and Miller may have wanted to do with that character. Then again, maybe it had to do with like what they wanted to do with Lando, or what they wanted to do with one of the other character, Woody Harrelson's character or Tandy Newton's character or whomever. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like it may have been I mean, you don't fire a director just for one thing.
And
right?
They fired 2 of them. I assume they work as a team, so it doesn't.
Right. I should say you don't fire your director 3 weeks before the end of principal photography for just one thing. I mean, this had to have been, I assume, the accumulation of a lot of different things. And maybe it was, like you said, that report said of that, like, well, they were very specific about how they wanted like the socks rolled up or rolled down, or, and so that just that kind of like micro, it basically implying that there was a lot of micromanaging going on, too much micromanaging going on, that, then again, the other bit about Lawrence Kasdan is that, he was when they announced these movies, the new movies, however many years ago, the photo was of Kathleen Kennedy and him, right? He's been pretty central. He's not part of the, vaunted Lucasfilm story group, but at least in terms of developing the movies, I think he's played a pretty key role in talking to Kathleen Kennedy about what to do and how to do it. So, his connections to Kathleen Kennedy, I think, probably can't be ignored here. I think it's maybe interesting is not the right word, but I think it's notable that on Twitter, and this gets to some of what you're talking about too, right? On Twitter, I've only seen support for Kathleen Kennedy's decision to fire them. Right. Like, and I haven't seen anyone really taking Lord and Miller's side. Now, the fact that I'm seeing people say, like, we need to start the hashtag I support Kathleen Kennedy or whatever, maybe that means there is some backlash against her and against Disney and against Lucasfilm that I just am not seeing in my feed, but it's out there. I don't know. And I don't know how to feel about that personally. Like, I get that, yeah, I want these Star Wars movies to be good, but on the other hand, like, I kind of believe that, well, you hire this director to make this movie, or this set of directors, this pair of people who direct, you hire them to do the thing, like, let them make the thing they wanted. And if it sucks, like, you're just going to have to take that as a lesson learned and move on in the future. Right. And one would think that Disney and Lucasfilm, certainly all of the way they've been talking in general, but about this movie specifically, is that, they are in a position where they feel like they could take risks, that they could be a little more experimental. Now that decision is now with this decision, the fear comes in like, well, as you say, maybe they're just going to try to play it safe, and they're going to try to, make this more like Rogue One, where, yeah, we're going to learn like how he met Chewbacca, and it's going to be this emotional moment, and it's going to tie, there are going to be all these echoes of episode 4 and 5. He's going to run into Boba Fett, and he's going to run into, or, all these other bounty hunters. He's going to run into Greedo. He's going to run into Jabba the Hutt, and who knows what, well, I should say we're learning a little bit. We still don't know how much of this was like micro issues versus macro issues, but I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable for fans to now wonder, like, okay, how much are they actually going to push to try to make these movies different, and how much are they going to kind of make these comfort food for Star Wars fans? And so given that, like, yeah, I mean, if Kathleen Kennedy, I mean, it's certainly within her rights and her, purview as the head of Lucasfilm to make a move like this. But at the same time, it's like, well, creative freedom should matter also. And so it's, I mean, I don't really think I don't really think it's a situation where fans should be like, oh yeah, this was absolutely the correct decision, or this was the horrible decision. It's kind of somewhere in the middle for me.
Yeah, and I agree at 100%. It's you know, I've always think it's like when it comes to Star Wars, it's that weird thing where I'm so steeped in nostalgia to the point where I can't see the forest for the trees, and I'm like, oh yeah, I want everything to have like a nice thread through, and everything's gonna seem to dovetail into each other. But even back then, even the prequels completely rebooted that concept. It's like you almost had to do like mental gymnastics to put everything back together. And then this Disney era has created a whole kind of new problem about this. And yeah, in the end, it's like, well, if you steep in that nostalgia for too long, it just becomes incredibly stagnant. It's like, as much as I love, what happens when you go, and it's like, even like say Rogue One, there's so much stuff there that's even like little nods to the fans and stuff. It's so great. But then it's like, it's almost like, well, it's kind of like having your dessert before you eat your dinner. It's like you got all that stuff and then there's no substance. There's no nutrition for the story or something. It's like, I think that would be the criticism of Rogue One, that a lot of it plays on nostalgia. And if you really take the story apart and go, yeah, that's not a really good story. It's completely dependent on the fact that you're intimately aware of Star Wars and all the layers that you're getting. It's like, Bail Organa, Jimmy Smith shows up on screen, and there's like this incredible, like heavy music and lighting of him. And I realize it's like, unless you've spent a lot of time with the prequels, you have no idea why Jimmy Smith just showed up in this movie. So I guess,
right, with like the Force theme playing behind it.
Right.
You're like, is this like a Jedi? Who is this guy?
Right. And it gets to be that point where it's like, when Lord and Miller were hired, I kind of assumed that they were getting hired because they had that, and I don't know if 21 and 22 Jump Street would necessarily be like, oh, I saw those movies and I knew those guys would be perfect for Star Wars. But, they had done the Lego movie. I mean, all things that I was not hugely fan of, but they had a kind of a style, a kind of a self-deprecating, self-aware film style. And I kind of I knew from the get-go that this Han Solo movie was going to probably have a lot of that kind of, witty banter. It was going to have a light tone to it. Mm-hmm. That's the easiest way to say it, because coming off Rogue One where everybody dies, and it's just like, and then they're like, here, you want to buy the toys of all the characters that have no more adventures?
Right.
But, even in the funny thing is, like, most of the people I know with kids haven't even seen it yet, because they're like, well, I'm waiting for them to get a little older.
Yeah.
So it's like that thing where like they made a kids movie not for kids. It was like for the fans, for the nerds. Come on, admit it. That thing was so much fan service, people. And I enjoyed it, but yeah, they were going to probably try something new. Now, obviously I don't have any window into the thing, but every bit of evidence and lip service and all this stuff made me feel like, okay, they're going to change the tone. And I was prepared probably to not like it, or to have to, maybe it'd be a thing, wouldn't be immediately like, oh wow, that was really great. It'd be like, no, I had to watch it a couple times. Now I kind of see where they're coming from. But now it's kind of like, does that mean there's, is it a reaction to maybe potentially some innovation in storytelling that's turned in episode 8, that maybe Kathleen Kennedy is kind of saying like, hey, we're doing this and we're going to catch so much hell for what's going to happen in 8. For us to turn around and do this in Han Solo is just going to be a real pain in the butt for us. But then again, she signed off on a script. They signed off on concepts. Yeah. They signed off on actors. They signed off on, I assume they all sit in a room and they did a reading, and Kathleen Kennedy was there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah, I mean, and that's why I wondered initially if there were like rewrites that they were trying to do, that someone was pushing for, and there was disagreement over rewrites, or, hey, we want to change the ending, or, we want to change whatever, they haven't filmed yet. Because like you said, like the script can be changed as you're filming, and usually is, but the bulk of it is locked in when you start shooting, and the bulk of your script is pretty much locked in 4 months into shooting because you've already shot most of it, right? The last 3 weeks, like, yeah, you're racing to get a lot of pages shot, but you're still, I mean, the bulk of the movie in theory is done by then. Maybe that was the issue too, right? Maybe they hadn't shot as much footage, as much usable footage as they were supposed to. Maybe they were behind schedule. I mean, I feel like we would have heard if that was the case, if they were like way behind schedule. But that's why I wondered initially. I was like, oh, I wonder if, you know, something came up. They were going to do some rewrites, and then they couldn't agree with the Kasdans about what to do. But, you know, again, speculation, who knows? But to your point, right? Like, yeah, they had 3 weeks left in principal photography. Kathleen Kennedy had signed off on a lot of this by this point, you know, like this isn't, and that's why I was saying, like, this has to be the accumulation of a lot of things, because for this to be just one thing coming up is unlikely, just because Kathleen Kennedy's already okayed so much already.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, what kind of things were they filming in Fuerteventura? Is like, you know, was it, you know, I mean, obviously action sequences, which I think that the little leak of kind of the Han driving some kind of hot rod or something, I think that was from England. So, I mean, I guess they've been out of Fuerteventura for a while, but then I swear 2-3 weeks ago, I heard that they were still filming there. So I don't know.
Right.
It's that kind of thing where it makes you wonder if, like, these movies are constructed in a way that we would be surprised about. Like, oh, we add the story later or something like that. You know, it's like we just do the interstitials, like, you know, somebody coming down a ramp, and we have to shoot the plates for the CGI, and then then we'll fix the, you know, the fine details in our reshoots or something. Because I know that, you know, reshoots are part and parcel with this. Have been a part and parcel with, actually, from the beginning. There've been reshoots and extra scenes all the way up into A New Hope. You know, I think what was it? The hallway of the Tantive 4 or whatever. I think that was filmed weeks. You know, not weeks before release, but it was filmed very late in production. I think it was this thing where they kind of needed to, you know, boost the thing, which is ironic because then, you know, Rogue One, one of the last things they filmed was the Tantive 4, or whatever the hallway is when the escape of that ship. So it's kind of hilarious. But my point kind of is, like, it just makes me wonder if there's something like a lot more juicy kind of in the in the ether about this, like, because it's like, well, some of this stuff could have, you know, if it's fundamental tone problems, how could anything have gotten this far off of this? Isn't like Michael Cimino's, you know, Heaven's Gate, you know, where it's like they're out in the sticks and then they're just pouring money. What was it? United Artists, I guess, you know, was pouring money into this movie, and then with no oversight, and then all of a sudden they realized they had spent $40 million on a movie being made in like 1979, and it was like, and all of a sudden before they knew, you know, what was going on. I mean, what was the other? They didn't replace the director on pay. And see, this is why I'm like, holy smokes, you know, a lot of these things would happen, like, you know, like, let's take a blockbuster like Waterworld, and I forget who directed Waterworld, but I mean, everybody knows that was like another big, like, blunder that they made. Right. It was, but again, this was an unestablished franchise. But then at the end they called it Fish Tar and Kevin's Gate and all these making jokes. But apparently Costner actually jumped in and, like, filmed the last parts of the movie, and, you know, they had to reshoot whole sequences because, you know, Kevin Costner's hair was thinning and he was uncomfortable about how much of his scalp was showing. So they spent millions on these kind of things, but they never ever announced, like, we're firing the director. You know what I mean? Right. That's kind of like, that was kind of the thing that they put out there to say, hey, I know you guys are really worried about hearing about another guy playing Han Solo, but we got these great directors, and they're, you know, they're going to shepherd it from a thing. We got this great writer, and it's like, It almost makes me wonder if they jumped into this having a lot of these things unresolved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, there was a big announcement a couple weeks ago about, this is unrelated to Star Wars, that Joss Whedon was going to be stepping in for Zack Snyder to finish Justice League.
Yeah.
But that was because of a family tragedy. Zack Snyder had a child pass away, and he was like, I can't finish this movie. And Joss Whedon is already kind of brought into the cadre of the Warner DCU or whatever, and I guess he's doing Batwoman or Batgirl or something.
Mm-hmm.
So he's, and he's directed major live action films. So it's not, it's not going to be that big of a deal. But with this, it's just kind of like, I don't know. I mean, part of me wants to vilify Lucasfilm and think like, what were you thinking? Why are you so afraid of change? Because, if all these movies are going to be is a pat on the back and a new Stormtrooper every couple years, it's like Star Wars is, as a film franchise, it's just going to die off. It's just going to be a thing where young kids are going to be like, it's just going to be in the morass of Spider-Man and Iron Man and Batman and Star Wars. Right. And it's like, it's not going to mean anything. It's just going to be a thing where it's going to be, and of course, yeah, it might be already at that point, but my argument
for people who are, casual fans or who don't
like
Star Wars or whatever, it probably already,
yes,
they're like, oh, it's just another thing.
And I mean, and there's no more greater example of that. We're in that post Lucas era that, this is happening now. Now, Lucas had always been, for a lot of people kind of pick on him for being kind of a tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
But he's been always very open about like the problems and inherent to the production. Now, I would say he never ever conceded that the problems inherent to his films, but he was always pretty straightforward, like, oh, we had this happen and we reshoot this and I'm unhappy with this and blah blah blah. But yeah, just this kind of like, the only way it could be worse is if the Phil and Lord and Miller were like making like snide comments. Now there had been some tweet, and I forget which one it was, and I'd seen it, and it's in one of their feeds, and I tried to look for it and couldn't find it, but it was back in early May, and it was something like whoever said that we had to be that being reasonable was a virtue or something like that,
right?
Which people are reading a lot into. Now that could be anything from our current political issues to his issues with Disney. So it's like so loaded now. You never know what it really is going to be. But that some people have already pointed to that as a sign that, there was already trouble in paradise, as far back as May, which, it wouldn't shock me, but I don't know. It's just this, I mean, they can do amazing things with computers now, but it makes me really wonder. It's like, how are you going to fix a movie that you don't like the tone of, and you're down to like, I mean, I'm no expert on film production, but I assume principal photography on a film like this, and that principal photography is they put the makeup on the actors and they stand on set. Usually that's about 2 months or something, like 2.5 months. I mean, I know the original Star Wars, or I might be confusing this with American Graffiti. I think American Graffiti, like when Lucas did it, it was like a 28-day shoot or something, or it was like even shorter than that. And I think Star Wars was around a month, and most of it, everything else is just, so they only actually are on set for a couple months, and then they construct the movie with the special effects, and then they have to do, a lot of times it's like stand-ins, and you think you're seeing the actors, but it's somebody, their stand-in, know, it's a shot from the back. Well, now with digital, they can, that's one of the things I was reading about this thing about digital de-aging.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess naively, I assumed that kind of thing would be too expensive, but now it's gotten to be such a big deal that I read this article where they go in and they fix people's eyebrows. Like this girl does this weird look on her face every time she screams. They go into the computer and fix her eyebrows. So my point is it's like it. As much as I want to say, this is the death knell for this movie, they're going to have weeks and weeks and weeks of unusable footage. Well, the truth is that the filmmaking is actually getting to be a lot like the way George Lucas kind of had presented it in the 90s, and we all laughed at him. And the idea that the original take is only just the starting line of the editing process. And I feel like in some ways, like George is probably sitting back and going, "Huh, you thought it was so easy, didn't you? You thought all you had to do is throw some stormtroopers up there and a couple lightsabers and a Wookiee or two. No, it's hard. You got to go out there and you got to move, Captain Panaka. You got to put him in the back when he was up front because it just doesn't work." But you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing where it's like, and we're going to definitely get into some talk about who might be stepping in. But part of me feels like, man, the only way that they're going to save this is that they're going to say, "Hey, George, do you want to come in and save this movie for us?"
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are saying, Lucas is available. He's not doing anything, but I don't think he would want to.
Yeah, he's not been a guy. He tends not to be a guy who. Now I want to say he jumped in and did some filming on. God, what was it? I'm confusing the two, but I think Lucas may had done some second unit work for either Munich or maybe Saving Private Ryan. Oh no, it was you know what it was, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to check it, but I think it was for War of the Worlds. Is that for a brief time there, Spielberg was had a movie after movie after movie. He did 3 movies in a short spell, and I think Lucas came in and did some second unit work for that. So it's he still could jump in and say, if he could possibly, nobody's even floated this. So this is just all my creation. But this is the idea that hey, this could be his shining chance to come in. And I don't know if he spends a lot of time while he's counting his billions worrying about I never really got my chance to show people what I could do. But I think it would be kind of cool, and it would probably quell a lot, or we'd find out exactly how much times have changed, and then people would be screaming bloody murder, "Oh no, you're not going to bring him in." But it would be a kind of a great PR kind of I think if you brought in a guy like Lucas to come in and say, "Hey, I don't have a say in them, they told me what they want. I'm going to give them what they want," obviously with his own flourishes. I think that would make people go, "Lord Miller who?" really quickly. But that's in a perfect world. I mean, I'd even thought to myself, well, what's Gareth Edwards up to? He's probably in the...
Right. Is Tony Gilroy busy?
Yeah, it's that kind of, if these guys were able to fix this movie, maybe they could fix this movie. But the weird thing is that it's still being filmed. So whatever problems that they had, they were big enough.
Yeah.
That they're "Oh, we can't fix this in reshoots." It might be down to a tone thing completely.
Well, because the other thing, I mean, with only 3 weeks left in principal photography, the bulk of this movie has already been shot, right? So if it's a tone issue, you're going to have to reconcile whatever you shoot from now on with the 4 months that have already been filmed, right? So that, like you said, there's only so much you can do with that, and you can do a lot more than you used to be able to, but and reshoot some things, but. The raw material you have, you're starting with a lot of raw material that someone else made for you or produced for you. But, I think the big thing that whoever they hire to replace Lord and Miller, right, the big thing is that they're going to be in charge of the editing and the post-production and overseeing all of the, ILM, CG stuff that you were talking about. And so... Yeah, I mean, I think that's. Yes, it sounds like they're really far into the process, and they are in terms of the principal photography. But in general, this movie wasn't going to come out until next year, right? There was still about 12 months, 11 months left before this movie was going to come out. That's still a fair amount of time to have someone else come in there, put their stamp on it through the editing process. And like you said, kind of constructing these scenes in a slightly different way, or at least creating a work environment that you as Kathleen Kennedy feel is more conducive to actually getting a movie made that you think will be worth making. So that's a good way to segue into some names that have been floated. There have been 3 that I've seen so far. First of which is Ron Howard. Ron Howard's name came up a few times. There was this, I guess he had been asked, Lucas went to, Ron Howard, who of course they worked on Willow together, so when Lucas was making the prequels, he asked Ron Howard, or he asked, or he gauged interest in whether Ron Howard would want to direct one of them, and Ron Howard declined. Was he working on like Apollo 13 then, or some that was probably around there?
Something like that.
Ron Howard, I would be skeptical if it turns out to be him, if only because I think he has a couple of other movies in pre-production that he's working on. So he has enough on his plate. The second name is Lawrence Kasdan. And then the third name is Joe Johnston. Both of whom have ties to Star Wars. Of course, Kasdan, we've talked about. Joe Johnston, worked in the art department on Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I don't think he worked on A New Hope, but he may have, but in a lower level capacity.
Right.
And so recently he directed the first Captain America movie. He directed Jurassic Park 3. He directed The Rocketeer.
Jumanji.
Yeah. So, he's someone who has worked, he has a connection to Star Wars. He's worked in movies recently enough. He's directed movies recently enough, a big movie like that Captain America movie, where, he kind of knows how these things go and managing a big kind of digital effects department. Lawrence Kasdan, for me, I think would be the easiest choice to make, just given logistically, like, okay, we need someone to step in, right? Because they can't drag this thing out for 2 more months trying to find a new director, right? They need someone in there pretty quickly because all of the other actors, right, they book their schedules around shooting this, but then they have other projects that they're going to go work on, right? Donald Glover has a ton of stuff going on. Woody Harrelson is popping up in movies all the time again. So he, I'm sure, has stuff on his plate. Tandy Newton has stuff to do. I'm sure the rest do as well, Emilia Clarke, etc. So, you can't just delay principal photography for 2 months because then your actors start becoming unavailable. So they need to kind of make this decision quickly, given that he co-wrote the movie, given that he has this affinity for Han Solo and has specific ideas about who he thinks Han Solo is and what he should be doing. I think that Lawrence Kasdan makes the most sense to me, at least. Now, 2 complications there. One of which is that the Directors Guild of America has this rule apparently where if a director is removed from a movie, someone else who's already working on the movie can't take over for them unless it's like a temporary emergency. So like,
right.
Family member gets sick or passes away, or family emergency, basically, right? It's a union thing, right? It's to make sure that they don't say, oh, we're hiring this director and then fire them and replace them with a non, get me Steven Spielberg's non-union equivalent. So there's a complication there. They would have to negotiate that with the DGA, I think, and probably get some kind of waiver or something, or he would have to leave the DGA, which I don't think he would want to do. The other kind of catch there is he's written Star Wars movies, but Lawrence Kasdan hasn't directed Star Wars movies, and he doesn't have a whole lot of experience directing these kinds of movies. And so I don't know if he would have even any interest in taking over and suddenly being in charge of, okay, you have to tell ILM what to do, and you have to sit in all these meetings where they update you on like, well, here's the wireframe model of this character. Now here's the, animatic of this scene. Now here's the, that same scene fleshed out a little bit more, that process of giving notes on, basically every stage of the process for all of your digital scenes. I don't know if he has any interest in that. The last movie he directed was in 2012, or at least came out in 2012. and that was a movie called Darling Companion, starring Diane Keaton and Kevin Kline. The story of a woman who loves her dog more than her husband, and then her husband loses the dog. So that's the last movie he directed.
I've never even heard of
which,
that
which
movie.
he wrote and co-wrote with his wife, I believe. Right. So, and the movies the one movie he's most known for, The Big Chill, Body Heat. These are not your big effects pictures. He did direct Dreamcatcher, which came out in 2003, which was an adaptation of a Stephen King novel.
Which is one of those movies that I put on a Friday night when you want to watch a so bad it's good movie, unfortunately.
Right. Morgan Freeman, Thomas Jane, and Jason Lee headline that one. Timothy Olyphant, Tom Sizemore. Oh, you'll enjoy this one. It has Tom Sizemore.
Have you ever seen it?
No,
It's
Donnie Wahlberg.
If you
There's not a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 male actors are listed on the IMDb page before you get to a woman.
Yeah, no, there's not a lot of ladies in this.
It's
It's a very male dominated film, but I won't get too far into it. But I mean, I don't know if you're the kind of person like me that watch a lot. Like, it's like I'll watch a great movie like once, and I'll watch a bad movie like 5 times.
I'm not. I wasn't familiar with this particular.
Yeah,
thing.
it's on all the streaming sites. It's kind of like I don't know. It's pretty goofy.
With 5 nominations.
For Razzies.
Fangoria Chainsaw Awards, the Golden Schmoes Award, the Teen Choice Award. It was nominated for a Teen Choice Award. It was nominated for its sound editing. Anyway, so I imagine there are probably some effects in that movie, but maybe not on the scale of a Star Wars movie. And also that was 14 years ago now, 15 years ago now. Technology has changed a lot. So, like I said, I think Kasdan makes the most sense from a logistical point of view. But I don't know if he would personally have any interest in taking that on at this point.
Especially since there might be a good chance that he actually is part of the catalyst of why the previous directors were fired.
Right. Yeah. Joe Johnston, I think I wouldn't mind it. Certainly, like I said, he can do it. But the two things there are, I feel like given the fact that he has this connection with Star Wars, if he was going to direct a Star Wars movie, like he would have done it by now, right? Like either Lucas would have brought him in for the prequels, or they would have tapped him for Episode 9. Or something like that. And again, right, then we get into this situation of, okay, this movie fired the director. Who wants to be the person and steps in and takes over for them, right? And Hollywood, in many ways, is a small town. Word gets around. I'm sure that Lord and Miller's version of events will start circulating at some point, and I'm sure they'll have both their defenders and their detractors. But especially when you note, okay, they're members of the directors union, other directors are members of that same union. There's some kind of sense that like, well, do you want to be the person to take over from this other director who was fired? And I don't know. And I guess we'll find out who they can find who would be willing to say yes to that situation and walk into a thing where like, I don't know what the problems were, but I'm going to find out soon enough. And, if Lawrence Kasdan was part of the catalyst, like you're going to have to work with him and you're going to have to kind of go along with, you're going to have to basically agree not to do whatever it was that Lord and Miller were doing that got them fired. So, that's while there are some relatively big names out there now, it remains to be seen who they can get, who has the time, who isn't currently working on anything, and who would be willing to kind of step into this. And that, I think, I wouldn't be surprised if, this turns into, in some ways, a wake-up call for Star Wars fans of seeing, like, okay, just how much pull does Star Wars have right now? Where like, Star Wars fans think like, oh, it's Star Wars. Who wouldn't want to direct a Star Wars movie, right? Even without the nostalgia factor, right? Like it's an automatic moneymaker. You get your name out there. Your name's on this huge project, global phenomenon. Not everyone wants to be a part of that. And the problems that led to Lord and Miller, or I should say the situation, whatever it was that led to Lord and Miller's filing, may outweigh that. And I think a lot of Star Wars fans, depending on who they hire, it may be kind of a wake-up call just for like what the status of Star Wars is within the movie industry right now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. And I kept thinking about this, like, all this excitement when The Force Awakens came out. And then again, it got dulled with Rogue One. And I started thinking to myself, when is it going to stop being special? Star Wars is like that movie when they release a new one. They talk about it on the 6:00 news, the national news thing. And, they don't do that about Iron Man or whatever, unless there was an ancillary story to it. A new Star Wars movie was a cinematic event, unto itself in a way that even Star Wars now doesn't replicate, obviously in the 90s when people are waiting in line for it. But yeah, the center will not hold. Eventually these things are going to stop being, special. It got to be like, I always kind of jokingly notice, all these actors and everybody that was ever a friend to J.J. Abrams or Gareth Edwards, whatever, they all, well, not Gareth Edwards, but they all got to appear as a First Order stormtrooper. And then I was thinking when Rogue One came out, it's like, I bet you anything that the people that got to cameo as stormtroopers felt a little superior to the First Order because they got to wear the real armor. But then it's like, now we're like into the third movie, and it's like every famous person that wants to have a cameo has had a cameo. And now we're getting to the point where I'm sure like the cameos in these movies are going to be like, it's the guy from One Direction, or it's some actor from some TV show I've never seen. So all of a sudden It becomes, and that's, I'm being a little snobby, but my point is that kind of like it's the cachet of being associated with this franchise is already starting to wane, and it's only been a couple years. And it kind of bugs me that you're like, oh no, I think Disney may have been killing their golden goose. They might have, this idea of getting a movie out every year or every 18 months or every 9 months, depending on the film. Mm-hmm. Maybe why did they feel that they had to do that? I mean, I understand for the numbered ones, we have actors that are getting older, and the worst has already happened. We lost Carrie Fisher, and I don't know. I never think of like Star Wars as being like having, read the books, and there was frustrations, of course, and there was drama. Mm-hmm. There was always drama, but it was like 80s drama. Like, oh, George was mad that Gary Kurtz spent too much, and that Irvin Kershner like improvised too much. To me, that's just kind of like it. This kind of stuff makes stuff like watching that Dangerous Days documentary about Blade Runner seem like trite. Oh, Bud Yorkin was mad because you were over budget.
Right. Like, well, because you were making chairs from scratch instead of buying a chair. Right.
I mean, these are all like, in this economy, everything moves so fast. It has to be, and like, you're not just making a movie for, 40-year-old nerds. You're making a movie for kids. You're making a movie for China. You're making a movie for India. You're making a movie for, wherever that these movies play, and that they have to play them to the world. And it's like, it makes me wonder, it's like, by saying like, oh, we're going to be so different, did they kind of like hamstring themselves into this idea that it's like, well, okay, so if we have, like, let's sidestep the nostalgia thing. Let's just talk about the tone of a humorous tone for a sci-fi movie.
Right.
And like, how does that play in other countries? I don't know. Does it get lost in the translation? Do they even have to do it in the translation? It's like, they're dubbing people, so they can dub different tones of voice. They could dub different dialogue. You could essentially change the tone of a film by using a different voice artist in these countries. So I don't know if that is part of the problem. I mean, I don't even know how they even account for those things, or maybe they don't. Maybe that's something that happens later, way late in production. But you know, the fandom is aging, you know, and like there's and you have to get the young kids interested, otherwise it'll just be the all of a sudden 2021 stuff, the third anthology movie comes out, and then like everything else just kind of be like, well, eventually we'd like to return to that galaxy. But if you're like, well, we can't have a light tone, it's I don't know. I feel incredibly, almost like finding out that she kind of didn't like the tone and she got rid of him partly because of it almost makes me feel incredibly pandered to, and not necessarily it being a bad thing, where like I can appreciate that she's like, well, I don't want to piss off the fans, but it's like, it's almost like, well, if they had a vision, maybe this was the best place for them to be able to kind of reorientate the tone of some of these. Like, not every Star Wars movie has to have a dour tone to it at some point. You know, it could be just a fun story. And, you know, a guy like Joe Johnston he would be a great director for this, because and this is not an insult to him. It's actually, for me, it's a high compliment. He's a very workman-like director. And the fact that, okay, he doesn't reinvent the wheel, but his movies have a good structure. They're interesting stories. You're interested from, you know, maybe you might not be on the edge of your seat from the get-go, but you want to watch, like, Captain America. Like, that first one, I really enjoyed. Yes, it's not as good as Winter Soldier, but for an origin story, you know, and even Jurassic Park 3, which was kind of a ridiculous concept, is like, you know, we've milked this dinosaur thing forever. Well, we thought every last drop got milked out in 3, but obviously we had, you know, was it Jurassic Park?
They flipped it over and found some more in there.
They flipped the odometer. But, you know, the third movie in a franchise, if Sam Neill came back, but, you know, Sam Neill's a great actor, but he's not like, people don't go, I gotta get out there and, you know, see that new Sam Neill thing. So it's kind of like, sorry, I got a text and it distracted me. But my point is that, all right. You know, the whole thing is that the best candidate, and I'm just discovering this myself in my own head, is I really think it is George Lucas, which I know he's never going to do. So that being said, it's probably maybe Ron Howard with maybe George coming in as a consulting producer to kind of like right the ship a little bit and go like, you know, well, if you're questioning tone, and they work together, Ron Howard and George Lucas. Now, I don't know what that relationship
is. And George Lucas hates the Directors Guild, so he would be happy to give them the middle finger by taking over. And like, fine, you have this crazy rule, well, you know, I'll show you. And
don't think that it's beyond him, because I mean, he sold land. You know, a bunch of uptight people didn't like him wanting to build a museum or something, or expand Lucas the ranch, and so he fought them for years, and finally he just said, all right, I'm not going to do it, and he just built low income housing. And you know, I guess building low income housing isn't being vindictive, but you know, he's a guy that he keeps score, is I guess is what my point is that, you know, but like I just, nobody's even floated that idea. I mean, essentially maybe that means he's retired and he's done, and he's like, I'm not interested, and I definitely don't want to walk into that, which looks like was a terrible idea, and then you want me to fix it and then use my name to bolster your bad idea of a movie, and then I'll just, what does he have? You know, just like ruin my legacy even more, where people are going to burn me in effigy or whatever.
Yeah,
but, you know.
Right. So, you know, we've been speculating a lot. I think it's pretty clear. I don't think, you know, I'm pretty comfortable saying that we are not going to get a book about the making of this Han Solo movie. You know, we're I don't think they're going to want to like have to go into this again. But when you talked about, you know, kind of lighthearted, humorous action sci-fi movies, and how they did overseas, I immediately thought of the Guardians of the Galaxy. At least the first one. I haven't seen the second one. So the first one, Guardians of the Galaxy, it made. So this is from a Variety article from just less than a month ago. Oh, so this is Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Sorry. So Guardians of the Galaxy 2 made just under $343 million domestically, and then just under $455 million internationally, including about $98 million in China, $47 million in the UK, $25 million in Germany. So it's, it does it did all right. I don't know what the first. I was trying to look up the first one, and I got this. But that James Gunn. If they still wanted to keep some semblance of a lighthearted tone, he's a name that comes to mind as someone who can do that and clearly loves Star Wars. If you've seen any of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, James Gunn clearly loves Star Wars. Yeah. And this gets to a point you made earlier too about, who they were bringing onto these things. And I mean, Lord and Miller didn't give as much lip service to this as everyone else. But, certainly with J.J. Abrams and Gareth Edwards and Rian Johnson, the first three directors they hired were people who grew up loving Star Wars.
Right.
And that was kind of the extra hook that got them to say yes. Once they start looking for younger, directors that are slightly younger than that generation, there's this gap, right? There's the dark time, between the original movies and the prequels. Yeah, you'll have kids who grew up watching Star Wars and loving Star Wars, but you'll also find, I'm sure, lots of directors who didn't get into the industry because they love Star Wars and for whom that isn't like a dream of theirs. And so you lose that kind of that lure, that hook of like, well, you've always wanted to direct a Star Wars movie and now we're asking, so James Gunn would be, I think, someone for whom that hook would still work. Now, again, that gets into the issue of would he want to take over in this situation? And I mean, my guess is, right, most directors would want to start from the beginning, put their stamp on it, make all of these creative decisions, because a lot of the creative decisions, the look of the film, the all the conversations they have with the director of photography, who the director of photography is even, what the costumes look like, what the sets look like, all of that kind of stuff. All of those decisions were made, 8 months ago, basically, or 5-6 months ago. So if you're a director, it's because you want to be the one making those kinds of decisions, and so they're going to have to try to find a director who is okay with not having made any of those decisions and just finishing someone else's job for them. And that's going to be really hard. And that's why I think, Kasdan makes more sense logistically, because he's been involved in a lot of those conversations already, and probably helped shape some of those decisions to some degree. But it's going to be tough for them to find someone. Now, this is maybe a way for us to transition, or we can talk about it in this context, right? Where this was one of those little tiny tidbits of news in the interim from the last recording, but this thing with Edgar Wright, I assume you saw this, where he was somewhere promoting Baby Driver. Is it Baby Driver or Baby Driver? I'm not sure where the emphasis is placed, but Baby Driver.
Is that the one where Alec Baldwin throws off 100 and says, "Get me a California roll" or whatever? I'm hungry for sushi.
Right, he and his little Power Wheel.
Exactly.
That's what he's driving.
Segue.
So he was promoting that, and someone asked him, because he's Edgar Wright, it was like, oh, would you ever want to make a Star Wars thing, or like, basically asking if he would ever direct a Star Wars thing in the future. And he said something cryptic like, oh, well, be on the lookout. I have something cool planned for December. But then, someone else noticed that and was like, "Oh, well, that's an interesting question." He didn't say, no. So then they asked him directly, like, "Are you going to direct a Star Wars movie?" And he said no. He followed that up with a direct no. So he's created some confusion now about whether he will be directing a Star Wars movie. I have a feeling he won't.
Right. Well, especially with his history with Disney. Right.
Yeah, there's that. But would you want to see an Edgar Wright Star Wars movie, right? Like there's that too, where Spaced, the TV show Spaced has a lot of fans and there's a lot of overlap because they reference Star Wars so much. There's a lot of overlap and people love Edgar Wright for all of his, pop culture, references and his visual style and all of that. But is he someone who you would even want to see direct a Star Wars movie? Because for me, I'm not sure that I would even want to really. I don't know that I would really care about an Edgar Wright Star Wars movie.
Yeah, well, me neither. I mean, I'll be honest with you. He hasn't really done anything outside of his the Simon Pegg, Nick Frost.
Yeah, there's some name for that trilogy, but I can't remember.
Yeah, his Cornetto trilogy.
Yeah,
he hasn't really done anything out of the Cornetto trilogy that I really glommed onto and thought was Spaced was fun, but I mean that's getting to be 15 years old or maybe 18 years old now of a show, and it was a low budget TV show. So yeah, I mean I like his stuff. I never really got into the Scott Pilgrim thing, but that was a comic book that I had no real history with. Yeah, he's not the first guy I would think of as in some ways, in some respects, he's kind of in that realm of Kevin Smith in the thing that it's almost like he's too
right. He's too close to it.
He's got all those clever references. It's almost like you kind of take yourself out of the running with that. Yeah, look, before I say it, they'll just announce oh, he's going to come in and finish the movie or whatever. Maybe I'm just resentful because one time he kind of gave me a weird look in an amoeba in Hollywood. I recognized him. I didn't say anything, but he kind of looked over at me and kind of gave me that "don't talk to me" look and went back to looking at records. And I was just well, fine. You're never. Yeah. Years later, when it comes time to talk about Star Wars and you directing on a podcast, I'm gonna say nay. That's my revenge.
Yeah,
I'm bitter like Luke that way.
All right,
but no, honestly, like I said, it's. And I can't imagine he would be interested after essentially getting kind of screwed by Disney. Although I think I enjoyed Ant-Man. I thought it was
I did too.
It was
fun.
It was not like that kind of thing where it was oh well, they're just gonna find somebody and do it. No, I think overall it's gonna be. I think that's gonna be that, and the first Iron Man gonna be the kind of movies that people are gonna go, yeah, I don't really like those Marvel movies, but Ant-Man and Iron Man, stuff I don't have to watch the sequel necessarily to understand anything. It's those are actually going to be the standalone kind of Marvel movies. But yeah, I just can't imagine there's a lot that he would want to jump into because, like you said, it's going to be an uphill battle because the fans are going to, everything that's good, everything that's good, you're not going to get credit for. Either they're going to say, oh, Kathy Kennedy came in and she kind of bonked some heads together and got them thing. And then if it's bad, it's all going to be the director's fault. It's
right.
And it's well, there's already a Kathy Kennedy hash. Did we already talk about this? The Kathy Kennedy hashtag.
That a little bit, yeah.
Trying to
I support Kathleen Kennedy or something.
Really? Is this where we're at now?
I think it's probably preempting, like you say, any reviews. If this movie turns out to not be great, the reviewers are going to say, well, Disney, this big conglomerate, they fired the director. They're not interested in making interesting movies, or, Disney brought this on themselves. And so I think it's probably preemptive in that way. Sort of what that would be my guess in that way that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and I already see in the Twitterverse that and again, I don't know if these people have any more access than I do in the sense that they're oh, I just read this on Twitter and now I'm going to pretend I'm an insider. But right. the problem on Twitter is people are saying, yeah, somebody DM'd me and said that I was talking about episode 9 because I think we should probably talk about that next. That episode 9 is going to be a shit show for lack of a better term. And somebody DM'd this person and said, Kathy Kennedy's probably got a lot more problems right now with Han Solo movie, and the person declined to speculate. So apparently this was in the ether, and as time goes on, we're gonna learn a lot more about some of the reasoning, and hopefully it's not going to turn into some kind of, well, I don't know. I like some good Hollywood gossip and I'm willing to be like, I have enough emotional, distance between this movie and, any other Star Wars movie that I kind of like. It's kind of nice to see a little bit of like Hollywood drama within a franchise that I actually follow. I know the players like better, and like I've read up on them a lot more. So it's like, if we're gonna have a sacrificial lamb, is the Han Solo movie that like everybody refers to as like, it might actually elevate the prequels if it turns out to be just something they have to patchwork it together to get it out. And they're like, oh dang, well,
Right. Like, well, they may not have been great, but at least they were the one man's vision, and they had interesting ideas in them compared to these, soulless corporate sequels and one-off movies.
Exactly.
One last thing on this that I was thinking of earlier is that, when we got that, like, in this movie we'll find out how Han Solo got his name, and then that whole like uproar and controversy, like, I do wonder if that was kind of a sign early on that like everyone may not have been on the same page about what they were doing here, and that there were some creative disagreements,
and there was some semantic gymnastics, because Bob Iger had said that, and a guy like Bob Iger, I just can't imagine that he would be so careless in his tone.
I'm sure that's what someone told him. Like, here, this is what's happening, right? Like, or this is this is how you should describe the movie to the investors.
And then all of a sudden the backlash, and then Kathy's like, oh, that's not what he meant.
Right.
I don't know. It makes me wonder, like, all the like the Machiavellian stuff going on in the background, like, because I always assumed that Bob Iger, he actually he was supposed to step down from Disney. Because I think he's in his late 60s or whatever, and they kind of like decided to pay him to stay for 18 months because they hadn't been able to find their heir apparent yet. And I always assumed that like kind of this Lucasfilm thing was going to be kind of a vetting process for Kathleen Kennedy to eventually take over Disney. I mean, I don't know how these things work.
I think that was a lot of people's assumption.
I don't know if creatives necessarily work great in that thing, but they need figureheads.
She's a producer, right? Like,
right.
She's a
God, she's produced, your entire childhood. She was involved in that. So it's, that I think that, and you could really put that in the realm of, in the camp of, yes, I would say that, if Kathleen Kennedy decided that these guys needed to be let go in production, timing, whether the timing is right or not, there is something to be said about someone with a huge litany and a resume a mile long with some of the greatest films in the late 20th century, or most popular films of the 20th and 21st century. Maybe she knows a thing or two about movie production, and she's like, yeah, I don't really like the idea of firing my directors midstream, but I have to save this picture because I do have I have shareholders and I have fans, and they were turning this into their own, little sandbox, and it's not working. So, I mean, on that thing, yeah, you kind of, I don't know if I'm not standing with anybody because I think that's ridiculous, but it's, I can see the point why somebody would at the CEO level would just go like, no, we got to get rid of him because, I know a thing or two about movies from watching lots of behind the scenes documentaries on DVDs. I mean, and that's always been an issue. I mean, Lucas had a problem with Gil Taylor, the cinematographer of the original Star Wars, and he wanted to fire him, but the timeline or something about it would have screwed up the production that was behind, that he opted not to do it. But I think he always wished, and that's part of the reason he fixed so much of that first movie, is because he was not happy with the way it was shot. So there's nothing. So I mean, I just so late in the production, it just makes me blows my mind. My mind.
Yeah. So, we'll keep talking about directors, but we'll move on, as you suggested, to episode 9 and Colin Trevorrow. So the reason that people were worried that episode 9 might not be up to standard is that Colin Trevorrow, the director of episode 9, just had another movie come out called The Book of Henry, which is apparently awful and laughably awful. And the reviews that I've read, I've only read 2 reviews of it because, there's no point in me reading a dozen reviews of a bad movie. But, the reviews have boiled down to the acting is fine. You can tell all of the actors are really trying hard to, make this work. But the story is just kind of nonsensical. And Colin Trevorrow's directing isn't good enough to pull it off. It's competent, or it's fine, but not, it's not stellar work on his part. So now we're getting all of these, clickbait blog posts about could episode 9 be in trouble? Is Colin Trevorrow, is his time on episode 9 doomed? I don't think they're going to replace him. No. Chances are they saw a screening of the Book of Henry earlier than now, because these, if you're the producer of Lucasfilm, guess what? You get to see a bunch of movies early, if you want. But just before the movie came out, before we knew that it was a complete disaster, Colin Trevorrow gave an interview with the Fandango website, I guess, and there are a couple of questions he was asked that kind of tie in both to the Book of Henry, which is about this family, and so their kids in the movie, and then also Star Wars. So one, he was asked about how working on the Book of Henry relates to working on Star Wars, and he said, the Book of Henry is much more of a rich family drama, which is not dissimilar from Star Wars. I think having to force myself to confront my own fears as a parent and really dig into places that I may otherwise not want to dig into and want to look away from. It's where I have to go with Star Wars for it to be as emotionally resonant as it has to be. I have to find something deeply personal for myself in what I'm about to do, or else it's going to feel shallow. And then because, there are kids in this movie, in the Book of Henry, he was asked about, working with kids and understanding, kids and all of that. And so he said, it is extremely crucial that I understand what actual children are feeling about these stories that we're telling them. And I think it's important that I have kids. And if filmmakers don't have kids, they should go talk to them because they don't see things the same way that we did when we were kids. So yes, I'm very dialed into that because I think it's a requisite of the job. And then finally, he was asked kind of what movies he's preparing, what movies he's watching to prepare for working on episode 9. Ryan Johnson and Gareth Edwards both, mentioned, they were asked the same question, and they both listed 3 or 4 movies that they were watching that, to kind of prepare for working on their Star Wars movies. And so Colin Trevorrow was asked the same question, and he says, I mean, I watch all movies all the time just because I'm a person, but I'm not in a research phase right now. I also do a strange thing, which maybe isn't the right thing to do, but as I get close to a movie, I stop watching movies that are similar to it because I'm afraid I'm going to rip off shots from them or something, and I want it to feel pure and instinctive all along the way. There will be an interview someday where I'll say what those movies were that inspired me, and they'll print it. That's just not yet. So, we will maybe get a list of, here are 3 movies that, he looked to for inspiration, but that'll come later. But just this idea of, he stops watching movies similar to whatever he's working on so that he doesn't rip them off. And, so that was kind of the crux there. So, I mean, I think all of these answers to these questions, an interview like this, he's not going to be super revealing or, deep or anything, but they're all fine. But at the same time, it's yeah, I mean, maybe it's, yeah, you want Star Wars to be emotionally resonant, and you want to make sure that you're, making sure that it's resonant for kids. And so having kids, I'm sure, helps. But at the same time, it's yeah, but those are that's your kids. Or not, not everyone's kids. It needs to be a little more universal in that. And it seems like I wonder if there is a danger in almost making it too personal and like too specific. And I kind of think like George Lucas got there at a certain point with the prequels, but so what did you think of this interview, and what do you make of the fact that the Book of Henry is apparently awful? Like, does that mean anything to you? Does that affect your perception of what's going to happen with episode 9?
Well, it doesn't really, because the funny thing is he was the one I was least.
Our expectations were a little lower anyway.
Yeah.
Both of us.
It's so funny that because that whole thing about his kids, somebody said something in one of the, I'm just reading the Rotten Tomatoes, and somebody said, like, did he actually ever meet a kid or something like that? So basically the thing that he prides himself on, now this is just one reviewer's, and we know what opinions are like, but, somebody took him to task that he didn't seem to understand kids very well. So I maybe it is that problem where he made it too personal, where he just ran everything by his kids and never talked to another kid. And he's like, kids are different. It's like, no, your kids are different.
Yeah.
And it's like I said, I enjoyed on what's it called? What was the first one he did with
batteries not included, safety not guaranteed.
That's it. Yeah. The one that was filmed up the street from me. But, like I said, I enjoyed that movie. Ultimately, I didn't enjoy, like, the ending, and I didn't enjoy the casting, but, and again, Jurassic World I really, really, it's like every time I turn that movie on, and, because I have it on, like, streaming thing, and it just, I go, oh, give this another try. I'm like, whoa, I hate this movie. Because I honestly, and to be perfectly honest, a lot of it has to do with the way the kids are depicted in the thing. Now, I always just try to maybe chalk that up to being like, I wasn't really even a kid when the first Jurassic Park came out. So it's like, I'm even further from that now. And I really preferred the depiction of like these industrious children, these capable children in the first Jurassic Park. And then they come up with this, Jurassic World version of kids that are just, one strong wind away from bursting into tears the entire movie. So it's like, I almost feel like hopefully somebody took him aside and say, maybe you don't understand human nature as well as you think you do. Like, you're not really, it's like, the Star Wars, they're archetypes. They're not fully fleshed out characters. We don't really understand the underpinnings of every aspect of Luke Skywalker and what he's, and Rey. It's like, when the credits come up on episode 9, like a lot of these things that we think that we're going to understand, we're not going to understand, because that's not the way Star Wars movies are. They're a bit obscure. It's like the idea, like, could you ever imagine, it's like, we are like, 8 movies into Star Wars and we don't quite understand why Obi-Wan Kenobi disappeared spontaneously in the first one, even though they keep trying to hint that they're going to explain it, but they never do.
Yeah.
Or, it's like, oh, the Force is these little creatures that live inside your cells. Oh, no, it's not. Never mind. It's a thing, it's something different. It's like, you kind of have to be flexible in that, because Star Wars is not about getting necessary, you get some answers, but they're not necessarily the questions that you were asking. And I think if he thinks that he's got this, it's like that problem. Like, again, I'm going to invoke Kevin Smith, where Kevin Smith would constantly, back in the heyday when he was actually a going concern for people that were into movies, now, yes, in retrospect, you could watch Chasing Amy and like go, why did you ever think this guy was a talented? Whatever. It was 20 years ago. Don't be so hard on us. But this idea, he would always go like, well, nobody can touch my dialogue, in the sense that he meant that nobody could criticize his dialogue, because he felt that was his strength. And that was why people, well, now if you look at it, it's like, his dialogue is painful to watch, really. In retrospect, it's, self-aware. It was not his strength. His strength was that he built a community around his films, so he almost had a built-in audience for his own movies during his heyday. That was his real strength. It was not his quality as a filmmaker. It was the fact that he got you excited about movies that weren't necessarily sequels. And then he lost that, and then he started making sequels to try to bring those people back. And in some ways, I think that's kind of what Trevorrow needs to like know, that like maybe your strengths aren't your strengths, and you need to maybe, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. Kathleen Kennedy signed off on him seeing Jurassic World, so she saw something there that I surely didn't. It was the highest grossing film of 2014, 2015. I forget what year. So what do I know? But I mean, I think they wanted kind of a populist kind of guy who was like, oh, he's going to hit all the things that we want in a movie. And like, okay, so maybe it doesn't have the core of it is a little weak, but who cares if you can hit the 15 earmarks of a great blockbuster kind of situation. It's but if you watch, like, if you take like Jurassic Park and Jurassic World and you just look at how they were made and the kind of things that concern them, I don't know. It's hard for me not to talk about him, but without just talking about Jurassic World and why there's so many red flags in his qualities of like, it's like, the first movie had dinosaurs running around, this great CGI thing, which, you can't recreate the excitement it was when people first saw fully realized, really well done for the time CGI dinosaurs, and then replicate it 20 years ago. But then there's like whole sequences where like sisters are talking on the phone and they're just like talking about like, I really don't understand why you don't spend more time with your nephews. And it's like, oh my God, this is like a $500 million production and bring on the dinosaurs. I don't want to hear your stories about like, when is our family ever going to be healed for this thing that we don't even understand? And that's like, what a really weird focus for a blockbuster. I mean, I don't really need to have Luke Skywalker in this movie all of a sudden go like, I don't know what it's like. I never had parents, like I want to talk about my feelings. I mean, I'm not mocking people for having feelings, and I'm not mocking movies for having feelings. I don't know if Star Wars movies are about feelings. I mean, look at Rogue One. One of the weak links of that was the whole daddy issue with her, where it was supposed to be this emotional thread through in Star Wars, and really it kind of falls flat. It's like this thing where they tried to give it heart by creating like this strong relationship between Jyn and her father, but really that's not the thing that people I never heard anyone say like, yeah, my big takeaway from Rogue One was how, fathers influence us on our lives. So, and trying to tie this up my point is that if Colin Trevorrow really thinks that he's going to put a gooey emotional center in the middle of a Star Wars movie, he might want to slow his roll a little bit, Right.
Yeah. It's interesting that what you were saying about, maybe he needs to take a page from Lucas and understand that his strengths are not his strengths. Like I wonder what he thinks his strengths as a director are. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if a lot of directors are self-reflective. I mean, most people aren't that self-reflective, but I don't know how much he's spent time thinking about like, okay, this is what I do. This is what I'm good at. Because the now 3 movies that he's done that he's kind of known for, all very different, Safety Not Guaranteed. I guess this movie, I think maybe the idea was that it would be a little closer to Safety Not Guaranteed in terms of that like tone, that like independent movie feel tone, to it. But, it still is different from Safety Not Guaranteed, and then both of those are very different from Jurassic World, which are then, even Jurassic World in its ways is different from Star Wars. So I don't know that he has like a thing that you can pin down. It's like, oh, this is what Colin Trevorrow's style is, or this is what he's really good at as a director. I don't.
Right. So
yeah, I mean, it could be that he hasn't done enough where he knows where even he can identify like, oh, this is the thing that I do that I'm really good at.
Yeah, and his good thing might be he's really good at working with high level executives.
Yeah, right? Taking direction from above, working in these, which I mean is a skill.
It is, yeah. J.J. Abrams, I mean, that's a guy, obviously he's got talent, but one of the things, again, like I referred to earlier, is he doesn't suffer from like any kind of semblance of an imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
When he goes up there, is like, I can't imagine. And I always noticed if you go back and watch this, he downplays how old he actually was when Star Wars came out, because he was a little bit older than some kids. Mm-hmm. But he never makes you think that, like, well, on some level, he doesn't believe he was supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to be there. And I think that maybe Trevorrow, that's the feeling you can kind of get, for he's like, I'm not going to sit around and debate whether or not I should be here. That's not even on the table, which is good. Mm-hmm. Which, when you're, there's a lot of pressure, and I feel like it's like the guy hasn't even rolled film, and I'm already crucifying him. But again, red flags. This whole thing that we got the Han Solo problem, and then we find we lost Carrie Fisher. And then we found out that means, because we lost Carrie Fisher, we lost Rian Johnson's script too.
Right.
So they had to do a page 1 rewrite, and it's the guy that did Monster Trucks, and it's like and it's like, I don't want to rehash that, but my point is that we are almost getting to that that term I use about Joe Johnston, workman-like, which is not a dig, but then again, there is the idea of being
he's a working director.
To work. You got people like, I worked on this movie, I fixed this movie, that kind of thing, where you're just like, you're hiring a director, you're kind of almost hiring a plumber or an electrician, and then you're just kind of like, well, I know what a movie looks like, so let me take these parts and I'll make a movie out of it. And I think that's kind of what I'm worried that would be. And he's saying that his strength is his feel, and I'm saying I haven't seen it yet in any of his movies. Any real human feelings.
Yeah,
they're mostly like quirky and kind of weird in my estimation. But I wouldn't consider this stuff as much of a red flag as the Han Solo stuff, only because at this point they know it's almost like a house style at this point. Where it's like they kind of know where these saga movies have to end up, and it's a matter of like, well, can we get there with this? It's not like who knows how much Rian Johnson really is going to try to play with. I mean, we've already established the idea that we're going to jump right into the sequel with no gap, which is always going to be kind of an adjustment. But aside from that, I mean, how the aesthetics will look, the Vanity Fair aesthetics that we saw were, they didn't look that crazy on Star Wars to me. So I don't know if he's going to try to reinvent the wheel. I don't know. I will say this, that with all these things with all these big changes on deck and all these uncertainties, it takes me so far away from my opinion about the big twist in episode 8. I'm like, I'm like slowly having to back out of that, even though I didn't, I don't feel super strong about it, but I did want to put it out there while I was thinking about it. But now I'm thinking, like, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do what I was crazy to even think that, but whatever.
Well, and maybe a good place to kind of wrap up this conversation is to return back to looking towards the future. What happens next? Does this kind of put a wrinkle in their plans to make more movies? And I think Kathleen Kennedy had said previously that, or someone had said they were down to like 2 ideas and they were deciding between the 2 ideas. And I think they were expecting to make some announcement about that this month in June. We have 9 days left in June, and now this wrinkle, right? So Kathleen Kennedy now has to spend time putting out this fire and finding a director for the Han Solo movie. That's going to push back the announcement of what they do next, and maybe that's fine. But the fact that they were saying, okay, we're down to 2 options, certainly, the indication was then that they were going to make at least one more of these standalone movies. But whether this kind of puts a damper on either those specific plans or just on the broader idea, the broader agenda. And this is something that you raised really early on in our conversation. I want to come back to it, right? That what does this do to their overall plans? And had they even planned that far in advance where they knew, okay, well, we're going to do, 3 more of these and another trilogy, or were they truly just taking it kind of one movie, one idea at a time now? And does the loss of the directors on the Han Solo movie, does that then even put the brakes on those ideas and make them reconsider, maybe a Star Wars movie every year isn't the way we want to go about this, right? We make fewer movies, but we make sure that we make them the way that we want to make them and that we don't run into these problems because we're just doing so much at once.
Yeah. It's a question. It's like, yeah, I understand the perception of time. It's like, the 3 years between, say, like Empire and Jedi, that was like agony for a kid.
I know.
And, the funny thing is that because we are, a society that always speeds up, it's like now we're at this where it's like, The Last Jedi is coming out in December, and I'm just like, ugh, when is this going to come out? I mean, they've already, the big thing was that I've heard 2 news sources, one say, don't expect a trailer anytime soon, then almost right on the back of that, expect a trailer at D23 and Comic-Con.
Right.
And you're just like, either people don't know what they're talking about, or Lucasfilm isn't sure where they're going, and there's conflicting rumors.
And then, this will be a new trailer, but then like the next day, well, this might just be a recut of the first trailer.
Yeah. I'm honestly feeling that we're going to see this new trailer sooner rather than later, because they do have to get this taste out of people's mouths about, because like these ideas sometimes, like on franchise, it's kind of like a sports team at this point, that people are like, there's some problems in the locker room, and then that becomes the defining thing, like, oh well, nobody likes so and so, and I think they're going to have a bad season. Well, it's like, they need to come out with a thing like, oh, we just traded and we got this great guy, or we need to go out and show people what we're capable of and get people's minds off of like, oh, it looks like the Han Solo movie's in trouble. Looks like, the other director, that episode 9 is, borderline incompetent. And then we still have, like I said, Rian Johnson, every indication is, well, except for Mark Hamill, which I think he's already walked back, because it's like, he's going to have to, he had to walk, even if he believes even if what he's saying is not really what he meant. It's like he has to walk it back at this point, because it's just like, what are you doing? You're scaring people. It's like, you can scare people 5 years later when you're 70 and talk about how much you hated making that movie or something. Don't do it now. But my point is that, it's now that, and again, it's social media, and we've never had a time when, it's like, I would never have thought like to go out and try to find out what Gary Kurtz was thinking, or Irvin Kershner, or Richard Marquand. But now it's like, I know where all these directors, they all have Twitters, there's always a potential you could reach out and talk to them. We know who we're intimately involved in these people's, like, at least in the internet sphere, not in real life, but this amount of access, it's like, part of this is like, makes me feel like that's a lot of this stuff would have just been handled behind the scenes, or, it would have come out and there would have been very little speculation. They would have said, well, so-and-so's stepping down and someone's stepping in, but stuff breaks so fast and it disseminates through the internet so quickly. And again, it's personalities. It's like, Kathleen Kennedy has to be, out there as a thing, out in the front. Because, George, he ran Lucasfilm, but he had representatives for years. We just never knew who they were. Right. It's like now it's like...
Kathleen Kennedy is essentially the face of Lucasfilm now.
Yeah. But it's just amazing that, like, you have to do all the things that entail that job, and you have to keep an attractive welcoming and uncomplicated persona. And you have to, I was looking at Twitter and kind of just getting an idea of like, well, what information is out there. And of course, there's this whole thing where, like they're looking for new directors, and then people are already kind of going after, well, I bet you anything she won't pick this kind of director and this kind of director. It became all of a sudden the conversation about like, well, this is a great time to get a woman director into Star Wars, which, obviously depends on the director, because again, all the things we talked about, you're kind of walking into a shit show. Would you really want to make, would you really, that's all great for having a female director come on board, but it has to be somebody that's like, I have a vision, or I can work with this vision and I can fix what they didn't like about the last directors. And then potentially it might not work. So who, again, man or woman, who would want to walk into that? You would have to be a very specific. It either has to be a very special director or has to be someone with nothing to lose.
Yep.
I think that's where we're at with this.
Yep.
Okay. So, do we need to wrap up or?
Well, we can. Do you want to touch briefly on Battlefield 2?
Yeah, we could talk
stuff. The game, because that's. We can talk about the video game stuff a little bit. So there's a trailer that came out a little while ago, a gameplay trailer. They've been promoting it pretty heavily lately. It comes out soon, next month, I think.
What, the game?
Or no, the game comes out in October.
It comes out in November. Yeah.
Game comes out in November. The book, the tie-in novel, comes out next month. So... I mean, basically, just you've already pre-ordered the game. I think you said, right?
I did.
So
I even got like the deluxe one, so I can get it a day early, even.
Yeah, and I mean, in conversations, again, I'm not a big video game person anymore, but in conversations that you and I have had, it seems like, I mean, you almost have to pre-order these things now, and so for this gameplay trailer to come out, I mean, I guess who is this aimed at? Like, what is? Obviously, they want to promote it, and they want to, people who don't pay attention to these things haven't pre-ordered yet, so they're trying to get folks to pre-order now and raise awareness of this game. So, I mean, do you think in that sense did you like the way it looked? Did you think it's been successful in that sense? Is that even the point of this trailer, or is there another point to releasing these that I'm just not aware of? Like, what do you think about what you saw from the gameplay trailer?
I mean, as far as like the first thing you said about the pre-ordering thing, the reason I do that is because like places like, Best Buy and stuff, if you pre-order in advance, and I know I'm going to buy this, you can save like a lot more money. They give you like $10 back. So generally you don't have to, because so many people buy things now online. They just go in and put your credit card on your console and you just download it. It's not even that.
That's true.
But I think a lot of, the E3, the Electronics Expo, was a couple weeks ago, and that's usually where EA, which is the parent company that is doing these Star Wars things, they really want. This was, what was it? It wasn't. It was E3 of 15, I guess, was the one where the first Battlefront was the big reveal on it. I guess, yeah. Because it came out right before The Force Awakens, and then the Scarif thing came right because it was on the tail end of that. I mean, I think that everything is indicated that they've kind of, it's got better character models. I saw a comparison contrast about how much better the characters look, the hero characters, the digital models. Again, just to quickly reiterate, my problem with the first Battlefront was that it was very superficial, and it seemed very limited and restricted in the sense that you buy a $60 game and then you had to buy a $50 add-on to get the rest of the game. It's like it was almost released unfinished. Well, the first thing that EA has done is they've done away with the season pass, which means for 60, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have to pay money down the line, because then they kind of move it from the season pass to this concept of microtransactions within the game. But a lot of that ends up being aesthetics. It's like, oh, do you want to look like a Storm Scarif Trooper? Well, that's going to cost you $5. So that, to me, that doesn't, unless it's like levels of the game, aesthetics are kind of nothing to me, because especially a lot of the time you're not even seeing your own character, so it's just how you appear to others. But I think that they've, a lot of time now they're taking characters from all eras of the movies, meaning, Darth Maul can fight Yoda and whatnot, but generally people you play as kind of a nondescript character, so that even is not a thing. I think one of the big things that was an improvement is that they're going to add a single player with what looks like an interesting concept of I forget the name of the character that she's.
It's like Iden something.
Yeah, she's like a commando, and she witnesses the second Death Star explode.
She's an Imperial commando.
Yes, Imperial commando.
No, she's an Imperial soldier.
Yeah, she's a bad guy or a bad girl, and we're gonna find out her story about what happens after basically the destruction of the Empire. And so I think that, having been so long since we've had a Star Wars game with a story, which, well, of course, there was these mobile games that they've already petered out. There's Galaxy of Heroes, but that doesn't have a story. It's kind of, honestly, the gameplay is similar because you're able, it's similar to the multiplayer in the fact that they don't worry about it not being canon. Now, the single player of this Battlefront 2 is supposedly canon, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I like the idea that they're going to take the story seriously, and they're going to make every effort to try to, couch it within the existing movies. And it's just about her stuff. We didn't really get to see any of that. The woman that's the actress, she came out in a outfit that kind of looked like it was like a dress, but it was inspired with a lot of her costume from the gaming. So it's like Imperial blacks and textures, and she seemed really enthused. I didn't realize till later she'd been on that show True Blood. She'd played a character on that, so she's an experienced actress. And I think that's going to be kind of cool, because the last time we did that, it was Sam Witwer had done these Star Wars Force Unleashed game, which ultimately aren't. The first game is way better than the second, and even though so they're very arcade-ish. I'm kind of hoping that this is going to be more of an adventure kind of game, but everything indicates that they kind of have fixed what was wrong with the first one and what made the first one superficial. It remains to be seen when you get it out there and you're actually playing it. But, not a lot of people enjoy online multiplayer. And I would say that I ebb and flow with it. That, like, a lot of times it's kind of funny because it's like when you're actually playing with other people, it becomes like almost. It becomes more flimsy and less like there's less gravitas to the game, where it's like if you're playing a single player game, you're unraveling a story level by level to its conclusion. But when you just play multiplayer, you don't get that kind of, there's no narrative, and nothing seems to have any weight to it. So I think, when they did the presentation, they brought, that quote from John Boyega on Twitter, like, hey man, when are you going to have that first person part of the game? And they kind of used that as the patient zero of all the complaints about, hey, where's the first person on this? So I think they fixed it. I mean, I'm honestly, from what you sent me here last, I think it was you sent me the thing about the Amy Hennig game. I think that I'm a little bit more excited about that, but I think that's a way off. I don't think we're even going to hear about that until I mean, we won't even see anything of it for a year. Yeah,
that may be. We're getting a little more detail about what the game's about and what you have to do, but I think that is probably subject to change. And people are asking, well, why didn't we hear anything about the game this year? And it's, it's Battlefield or Battlefront 2's Battlefield 2's time to shine. So they're basically saying like, well, we have this other game to promote, meaning we're not ready to promote this game yet. Yeah, I mean, my sense too is that they've also been trying to promote the book pretty heavily. That actress whose name escapes me too, she mentioned the book in an interview she's done, and she is actually she's reading the audiobook version. So, they're really saying, look, this ties into the game. If you want to know more about this character and her story and all of that, you have to read the book to get, more backstory. I'm sure a lot of that's marketing. I mean, the only thing I really have to say is that, again, she's an Imperial agent. We've talked about this before. Like, they are playing up that, look, she's a hero. Every villain is a hero in their own mind, and she, has all these decisions she has to make and about, what's good and what's right and all that. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, I mean, there's a fine line to walk, but glorifying what are actual space Nazis. And so, with this book and all this other kind of thing, obviously they can't make everything about the rebels, but it seems like they are walking that line, at least at the moment. So yeah, that's all I had to say about it. And that Amy Hennig game and the Screaming Citadel stuff we can touch on in a couple weeks. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the trailer because that is a little fresher.
Yeah, I think it might be fun, but I thought Battlefront was going to be fun, and it had its problems, and it's definitely a game I haven't even booted up in several months, even though there's a ton of people playing it. I'm just kind of like, I'm done with it. It was too superficial. Like I said, I hope they figured a lot of it out, and I'm looking forward to it. So I guess we could.
So I think,
sorry.
We'll wrap up. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So, like I said, we covered a lot. We mainly talked about this director stuff. If you have
big news,
if you got something, you have some kind of left of field director that you think would be a great person to take on, the Han Solo movie or whatever, you got any kind of questions or concerns, you can always email us at hosts, that's HOSTS, at talkingbirdcast.com. We are on Twitter at Talking Birdcast. We have a website, www.talkingbirdcast.com, and we have an Amazon affiliate link that we always appreciate when you use. It's www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. Did you have anything to add, John?
No.
Okay.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Sorry about all the gaps, but it's summertime, man. Go out and take a walk. There's other podcasts. Yep. We'll be around. But thanks for sticking with us, and may the Force be with you.
A character like Han Solo, everyone has an impression in their mind of what that character's like. So what's casting? What's that process like for you guys?
I mean, we thought from the very beginning this was the hardest casting challenge of all time. I mean, the biggest boots to fill you can possibly imagine. Try to get someone who can capture all of those essences that you think of as Han. And so we did a very, very, very exhaustive search. We saw over 3,000 people for the part.
All across the world.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like we cast in 5 or 6 different offices, acting schools all across America and the UK.
It was like cowboy bars, like everything you can imagine. Trying to find someone who was wanted to make sure we turned over every rock to find someone who had the sort of charisma and the sort of maverick sort of swagger and
turns out that was a total waste of money because the person who got the part was the first person to audition. He was literally the first person to walk in the door. Kathy, I apologize for wasting that. It's nice to be sure, though.
Yes.
I've taken that out of your salary.
Okay, it's fair.